So now, we are continuing our journey through Genesis. Please open to Genesis chapter 29. We're going to start in verse 31, I believe. And as you turn there, we're going to do a small recap. I know sometimes I say that and it ends up not being, but please bear with me. Small recap. Jacob arrives in Haran, right? He left his parents. His mom sent him out. He's running from his brother. Jacob arrives in Haran. He finds the beautiful and shapely Rachel. Finds her, right? Beautiful and shapely Rachel. And he makes a deal to work how many years? 7 years. Good. He makes a deal to work 7 years for Rachel's hand in marriage. He works a 7. Uncle Laban pulls a switcheroo on Jacob, and he gives him who? Leah, right, Leah. Kind of gets a taste of his own medicine, because what does Jacob's name mean? Cheater, right? Takes me by the heel, he cheats. And I expressed my opinion that I think Jacob borderline worshipped Rachel. You guys remember that? And apologies for the video. The video recorded, but there was an error, and so I apologize. I can't post that one, so that was just for you. Last week. So, but I expressed, and we all discussed, that Jacob was borderline worshipped Rachel. He lived to honor himself, which led us to the question, who do we live to honor? And I kept asking all of you that. Who do you live to honor? And we talked about how important obedience is, right? I want to get into is like one shouldn't go and cheat on their spouse because I couldn't live without their spouse, okay? Because your opinion could change about your spouse, because that means now your obedience is now dictated upon another sinner. Problem, right? That's a problem that you're in having. The why, it's because my actions are dependent on another sinner. We don't want that. We don't want our actions to be dependent on another sinner, If we live to honor God, we honor all. Come persecution, joy, sadness, encouragement, times of blessing, doesn't matter. If you live to honor God, you'll honor all. And we'll talk about that more also. It's like who you listen to or obey in spite of how you feel is who you really honor. Okay? This is a point that I neglected to get to last week, but who you listen to in spite of how you feel is who you live to honor. What do you mean? What I mean by that is like how children, you think about a child, they want to listen to their parents, right? They may not feel, they was like, I want you to go upstairs and brush your teeth. What do they want to do? I want ice cream. They want to do whatever they want to do, right? But in spite of how they feel, an obedient child does what? Okay. And they go brush their teeth, right? That mindset. So the question I wanted to ask all of you last week, but I didn't get to, but I'll ask you now, you put it in the back of your own mind, who do you listen to in spite of how you feel? Because whoever that is who you honor. And your actions and deeds are the displays of worship of that decision. You can say, I listen to God, but your actions prove otherwise. Your deeds would not show that. James would say, what? It's like, show me your faith apart from your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. It's not a works-based salvation. It's evidence that I am a changed man or woman. You understand? Because I can tell all of you I'm a kung fu master. Won't you guys want to see something? It's like, prove it, right? And you need evidence to show that. And evidence of a true Christian is being a complete new creation, Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, things of that sort, right? All the fruits of the Spirit you should see flourishing from that person. If you don't, then it's like, what's going on here, right? But then I got into this, like if a person has God on the throne of their heart, a powerful, unchanging, consistent, perfect, unwavering, truthful source, that's what God is. If God is actually sitting on the throne of your heart, now you're in God's academy of spiritual growth where sanctification and spiritual discernment can now be nurtured. You are now in God's academy. We're going to get into all this, but you guys remember this talk, right? Last week, you know? So now let's continue our story. Let's get into it. We've spent enough time. Now we continue. Jacob has the ugly sister and the beauty he desired with an additional 7 years of service with Uncle Laban. That's where we are. He's got the ugly sister, Leah, and if you think I'm being wrong for saying that, it's pretty, she didn't have a sparkle in her eye, and it's not talking about like, you know, it's basically saying she's ugly, you know, because in contrast, Rachel is beautiful and shapely. Okay, so continuing now, verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive. Now, pause right there. God is always fair. I want to make this point. God is always fair. He sees what's going on here. Does he not know? Okay? Romans 2:11 tells us that there is no partiality with God. God is fair. Just because Leah's ugly doesn't mean that she should be treated differently. Right? I know this sounds horrible, or the way I'm putting it, but the idea is the same. There is no partiality with God. He doesn't see that. He sees that she's unloved. So he's going to address that. Proverbs 16:11 says, a just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern. It's interesting how God works everything out. It's interesting. Excuse me. How God works everything out. The Lord enabled Leah to have children. The ugly and unloved was given the privilege of childbearing, which was a big deal. It was a big deal. And the beautiful and the one who is loved could not conceive. You know, the Lord closed her womb. I see examples like this all the time. And I would challenge you to sit there and like look through the right lenses and look at the world the same. Today's examples would be like wealthy people with a big house and nice cars and an attractive family, but there's a sorry display of family with the internal relationships that are about as shallow as the distance from their face to their cell phone. They have no family. You have this beautiful, like what we would think, man, picture perfect, nice cars, big house, something a family could really enjoy, but there's no relationship. It's crazy how all of this, they made their things their God. You know, they're hardly home to enjoy the luxuries and sacrifice the time with children to work and achieve the standard that the world provides. Things like that. You understand? It's weird how that just balanced out. A person with many luxuries or money or toys, and how many times have you seen people with like, they have all this cool stuff and then they're terminally ill? Or if they got all these nice things and they get injured and they can't enjoy them. On the other end of the spectrum, there are, I'm sure I've seen hardworking men and women who live and they turn down a higher employment because it's going to injure their time with their family. That's commendable. I've seen men turn down overtime because I'm not going to miss my son's baseball game. That's commendable, right? And I've actually just this week, and we realize we're talking about the balances of everything. God is fair. Just this week, okay, I've seen a man of renown in my workplace. A man of renown in my workplace. A 5-star dad to what the world would consider. You know what I mean? A 5-star dad that the people enjoyed. But this man scoffed at God and he ended up taking his own life. At our workplace. And in the same week, a man who lost his wife due to cancer got to hold his newborn granddaughter days later. God is fair. He's not impartial. It truly is amazing to see how God works. Like Proverbs 16:11, I'll repeat that. A just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern. He keeps everything equal because he sees all of these things. And I'll conclude with this point for some comfort, for whatever you may be enduring. God does not put us through pain on purpose. You guys heard me say this. God does not put us through pain on purpose, but there's a purpose for the pain. Understand that. It's part of the process, right? Faith is like a muscle. How do you build muscle? Gotta tear it down so it can rebuild itself and it become stronger, right? Everything has its purpose and will contribute to God's glory somehow. Understand and have faith in that. Everything has its purpose and will contribute to God's glory somehow, some way, at some time. Okay? To those who are awaiting God's rescue or justice or vengeance, I promise that it will come according to his will and his time. How many of you are angry that wish that God would do something or just like exercise judgment or his justice would be served? Do any of you feel that way? I mean, how many people that you know something was done wrong to you or wrong to someone else? I mean, periodically come up in the prayer to where it's like I personally want God just to castrate all the guys who are putting women in sex trafficking. You know what I mean? Or those that are in Hollywood, that are in the pedophile rings and things like that. I want justice. Understand? I want justice. But I have to understand, I have to comfort myself, I have to remember that everything will work out. Everything has a purpose. As cruel as it sounds, children dying because of cancer or no food, women being taken advantage of and sold as sex slaves, sweatshops, men being, what do you call it, just like, experimented on for scientific purposes. These are horrible things to be thinking about. But I promise you, it's all going to work out. There's a scale in play. And everything will work out for God's glory. He will be venged. Vengeance is his. Everything's going to work out. We're impatient. I want vengeance now. I promise that it will come in according to his will and his time. Isaiah, at the end of Isaiah 49:23, says, "Those who trust in me will never be put to shame." That is a promise from God himself. Isaiah chapter 49, at the end of verse 23, he says, "Those who trust in me, I will never put to shame." I hold on to that, and I pray that all of you will too. It may not come in your time, it may not come at your timing or when you would like it or how you would like it, but I promise you, you will not be put to shame. Trust him. People will be comforted and people will pay. Understand that. People are going to be comforted and people will pay. They're going to pay for their crime. That will happen. Judgment will come. I promise. That person to sit there and just dogged you, done you dirty, all this other stuff, I promise you, judgment is coming. Our hearts should be more grieving over the fact that I want you to get right so you don't get it. Right? How many of you watched the Golden Globes? Well, I pray that Michelle Williams repents and she is born again and places her trust in the resurrected Lord Jesus. because after witnessing her acceptance for her Best Actress at the Golden Globes, expressing her gratitude in living in a country where she can legally murder her unborn child. I pray that the blood of her child, and this is an honest prayer, would cry out to her. Because there will be a day where she stands before the holy God and her murdered child, without her Golden Globe in her hand, with the question to be asked, was it worth it? We only got into one verse. Let's move on. Sorry. Verse 32. I'll start from the beginning of it. When the Lord saw Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive. God is keeping things in balance. Okay? He's being fair. So Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has noticed my misery, and now my husband will love me." She soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon, for she said, "The Lord has heard that I was unloved and has given me another son." She became pregnant a third time and gave birth to another son. He was named Levi, for she said, "Surely this time my husband will feel affection for me, since I have given him 3 sons." Once again, verse 35, Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son. She named him Judah. For she said, "Now I will praise the Lord." And then she stopped having children. Right? That's why we named our son Judah, is because that means I will praise the Lord. You know what I mean? We named our son that because of that. And also, this is the lineage, Judah, where the line of Jesus Christ will be counted. This is where Jesus Christ comes from. He comes from the line of Judah, that Jesus Christ is referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? So Leah now has been enabled to have children. Rachel is now barren. She cannot have any children. And Leah kicks out 4 kids. All right? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. All right? I'm pretty sure they're probably all going to be back to back. All right? And it's true. I want to just point out that chapter 30, verses 1 and 2, I want to point this out. When Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. She pleaded with Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Be careful what you ask for. I'll give you a little spoiler alert. Rachel ends up having 2 children. She'll have Joseph and Benjamin. And Benjamin, while she is giving birth, is the one that kills her. She dies in childbirth. So interesting. Give me children or I'll die. Be very careful what you ask for. Then Jacob became furious with Rachel. Verse 2, chapter 30. "Am I God?" he asked. "He is the one who has kept you from having children." It's true. It's absolutely true. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. Elkanah and Hannah, the Lord opened her womb, and that's how Samuel was born. The Lord is the one who's in charge of all that, folks. I've actually heard stories where people will go through contraceptives, double contraceptives, and there's still pregnancies. Like seriously, man got snipped, girl got whatever, and they still got pregnant. Genesis 21, opened Sarah's womb. Sarah's womb was opened in Genesis 21. Remember, Sarah wasn't having any children. Genesis 25, Isaac entreated the Lord because Rebekah was barren. I mean, you remember when Isaac was like, "I'm not having any children." And he actually goes and he prays the Lord, and then she ends up having twins. You remember what's the name of those twins? What was it? That's right, Jacob and Esau. Good. Well, who was Isaac's brother? Or half-brother, should I say? Ishmael. Good. All right. Man, you guys are Bible scholars already. That's awesome. In Judges chapter 13, verse 3, there's a man named Manoah. excuse me, and his wife, they could not conceive. But the Lord opened up his wife's womb, and that's how we got Samson. Remember, long hair, strong? The guy, that crazy story of all the kids like this, Samson, whatever. Anyway, Hosea chapter 9, verse 11, Hosea announces Israel's punishment. Children will not be born. You won't even conceive. Jesus, same person. Jesus, God actually announces this judgment through the prophet Hosea because of what Israel is doing. He's saying, you will not have any children. No children will be born. You won't even be able to conceive. The Lord is shutting wombs. No one's allowed. In Luke chapter 1, Elizabeth, how many of you know about John the Baptist? The Lord opened up Elizabeth's womb for her to be, to get pregnant. So it's a true statement. And I mean, it's like, and it was like I'll get to that point in a minute. It's a true statement. I mean, I know some of you may know people who battle with this whole idea that they're not having kids, or they want kids, or they're trying and they're doing all this infertility stuff and all this other stuff. It's a spiritual issue. I'm a firm believer of that. The spiritual issue. There are some people that I believe that are withheld from having children just for the specific reason is because they're going to idolize and worship those children over God. I want it so bad. If there's anything that I've understand how God works, once you have accepted that, I can live without it, that's when you get it. I was trying to do it with my son and buying him an Xbox One, but my brother-in-law just decided to go ahead and help himself and whatever. I was trying to make Jaden not want an Xbox One, to where he's like, I don't even care anymore. Then I was going to get him one, because I was like, that's perfect. This is a perfect lesson. I can do it this way. And my brother-in-law, he comes home with it, like, hey, look what I'm like, oh my God. Anyway. Verse 3, moving on. Give me children or Then Jacob became furious with Rachel. Am I God, he asked. He's the one who has kept you from having children. That was verse 2. Verse 3, then Rachel told him, take my maid Bilhah and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too. So Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Does this sound familiar? Where have we seen this before? Sarah. Right. What did Sarah do? She gave who to Abraham? Hagar. And that is the mother of Ishmael. Man, you guys are awesome. Cool. So, for who's got a King James or a New King James? You do? Can you read verse 3 for me? Nice and loud.
So she said, here is my maid Bilhah.
Mm-hmm.
Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees.
Right.
I also may have children by her.
Right, so there's a reference where it says, shall bear children on my knees, right, or upon my knees. What does that mean? What's that all about? Right now, it just, in mind, it says through her. You know what I mean? But there's a reason why it's in that. They're very illustrative back then. There was a lot of symbolism, okay? There was things, they meant something. And like an example would be, if you saw somebody out in the middle of the street standing on an American flag, like under his feet, with like a Molotov in his hand, what would you think? Disgrace. You see an illustration and it communicates something, right? You guys understand? So I think us human beings, we naturally look for that and we understand that, and there's things that communicate things to us underneath the surface through illustration. So here, it's like what they did back then is that a woman who could not have children, if there was another woman to be like a surrogate mother, what she would do is that the woman who is giving birth would actually sit on the knees of the woman that she's being a surrogate mother for, to illustrate to where let's say, Rachel would be sitting down, Bilhah would sit on her knees and give birth to children, and whatever child comes out, Bilhah will be moved aside, and then here comes Rachel, this child is mine. It was an illustration of these children are mine, they're not yours. That's what it's illustrating. So upon my knees is that it was a practice they did back then for that purpose. The surrogate mother would sit on the knees of the future mom, right, and give birth. And then she would be moved out of the way, and then the real mom, we'll put that in quotes, would hold and be the child's mother. Okay, so that's what that means. A little nugget for you. What that means, upon my knees. What's that mean? It was a practice that they did back then. All right. So, moving on. Let's continue. So Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Bilhah became pregnant and presented him with a son. Rachel named him Dan, for he said, God has vindicated me. He has heard my request and given me a son. Then Bilhah became pregnant again and gave Jacob a second son. Rachel named him Naphtali, for she said, I have struggled hard with my sister and I'm winning. Meanwhile, Leah realized that she wasn't getting pregnant anymore, so she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Bless his heart. Soon Zilpah presented him with a son. Leah named him Gad, for she said, how fortunate I am. Then Zilpah gave Jacob a second son, and Leah named him Asher. Realize these women are not naming their own children. Bilhah's not naming her children. Zilpah's not naming these children. It's Leah and Rachel, because these children they're mine. They don't belong to you, right? Leah named him, because Zilpah bore him, but Leah named him. How many of you women would like to give a child you don't have the right to name him? I don't know. For she said, what joy is mine? That's what Asher means. What joy is mine? And now the other women will celebrate with me. So there we are. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 children we're up to. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Up to 8 kids so far. And we got 4 different baby mamas. All right, moving on. One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother. Leah brought them to his mother Leah. Forgive me. Rachel begged Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. Now mandrakes, we don't know what they are. But it was believed to be that they were actually an aphrodisiac fruit. It was a fruit that was an aphrodisiac, and it was actually very healthy, and also there was a lot of fertility benefits. So that was the argument about the mandrakes. The mandrakes, they can't get pregnant, neither Leah nor Rachel, and mandrakes was like a big deal, right? So Leah's son found them. Reuben found some mandrakes growing in the field, and he brought them to his mother. But Leah angrily replied, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now will you steal my son's mandrakes too? Rachel answered, I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of your mandrakes. So I think Rachel held the monopoly, because that was the one that Jacob loved. That was the one he wanted to be with. Jacob just had to go and satisfy all the other women just because, but his main apple of his eye was Rachel. So Rachel was like, I'll give you my husband for the night, if you give me some of those mandrakes. Verse 16, so that evening as Jacob was coming home from the fields, probably all tired, working, Leah went out to meet him. You must come and sleep with me tonight, she said. I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. So that night he slept with Leah, and God answered Leah's prayers, and she became pregnant again and gave birth to a 5th son for Jacob. She named him Issachar, for she said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband as a wife. Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a 6th son for Jacob. She named him Zebulun, for she said, God has given me a good reward. Now my husband will treat me with respect, for I have given him 6 sons. Later she gave birth to a daughter. Her name was Dinah or Dina, however you want to say it. Verse 22, then God remembers Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. God has removed my disgrace, she said, and she named him Joseph, for she said, may the Lord add yet another son to my family. Now, what kind of name is that? All this time, her first son that she's able to born, Joseph, is what she names him, and that means, may the Lord add me another one. Give me another kid. How many of you would like to be named that? You're the firstborn from your mother, and your mom says, like, I want another one. She's never satisfied, even when she got what she wanted. Never satisfied. Now my question is, how desperate do you have to be? Let me ask you, would any of you suggest to their spouse to take another woman or man to be an additional spouse for their purpose for being a surrogate for you? Could you give your husband or wife up just so that they could, hey, do this? How desperate do you have to be? How self-absorbed, how egocentric, how selfish do you have to be? Now understand this, that children was a big deal in those days. If a woman could not provide children, she was perceived as cursed. Understand that. It was a big deal to have kids. You know, if she couldn't have kids, she was perceived to have cursed. Maybe you know somebody who's going through that. Maybe they feel shameful if they can't provide for their husband a child. You know what I mean? Or some, science has gotten crazy nowadays to where it's like sometimes you find out that the man himself isn't, what is it called? Fertile, right? He's not fertile. Doesn't take whatever it is. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not going to get into it. But honestly, and there's some shame associated with that. You want to provide, you want to have a family, you want to do all this other stuff, and you just can't, you know what I mean? But we spoke about this. The Lord is the one who opens the womb and makes it all happen. Anyway, so I feel like today standards are different. If you don't mind me, saying it seems actually today it's actually shameful to be a stay-at-home mom or to have children is not a joy, but it ends up being an added cost and an added responsibility. That's what I feel like it today is. Back then, it was like you were shamed if you couldn't provide children. Now then, if you can't provide children, it's like, all right. I ain't got to worry about getting pregnant. It's sad. How far have we come? People aren't enjoying it. It's just like it's a shame. I don't want to put my body through that. I don't want that happening to me. I don't want to give up on life. But you got all these different excuses. It's a shame. It really is. I think it's a shame. People do some stupid things when they're a megalomaniac or when they're self-absorbed, egocentric. But the problem is, let me point this out. The problem is the ones involved often don't discern, one, what it is they're sacrificing, and two, they don't discern what they're actually doing is unwise. You don't understand what you're sacrificing. What do you mean by that? Well, let's just go off of what we went through, like Miss Michelle Williams, previously mentioned. She sacrificed her unborn child for the price of a personal accomplishment. That's what you sacrificed. Your unborn child. For what? Your personal accomplishment. Because you're so self-absorbed in your own. It's disobedience to God. Would you agree? I would say like premarital sex, living with one another and playing house at the cost of disobedience and a poor witness to the outside world and unbelievers. You're sacrificing your evangelical influence. Don't sit there and talk Jesus about them because they're going to roll their eyes at you. Don't do it. So you need to repent and place your trust in the Lord. You're living with a woman, it's not even your wife. Come at me with that. You sacrifice your evangelism. And what's the Great Commission? Go into all the world, preach the gospel, right? It's your job to preach the gospel, so then you have to walk in a manner worthy of the gospel, and you're going to sit there and you can connect the dots there, right? It's like an addict who will rob and lie to someone to get their next hit. It's disobedient to God. What are they sacrificing? They're sacrificing their integrity, their trustworthiness, and your self-control. You just sacrificed that. You have lost that. People can't trust you. How many of you have ever been friends with an addict? Can you trust them?
No.
Would you say that they would walk around with integrity? You think they would do the right thing if no one was looking? You see what I'm saying? Now, this is not me being judgmental. This is just obvious. I'm just identifying these are, by default, what ends up being sacrificed. Someone lies to you, your integrity and your trustworthiness has just been injured. By default, right? You sacrifice that. Like a spouse agreeing for the other spouse to strip because the money's good. It's dumb. What are you sacrificing? It's disobedient to God. You're sacrificing each other, profaning the marriage illustration. What marriage means. Now I'm going to kick the dog as I walk by on this one, but this is my opinion. My opinion is, which backed by biblical principles, the refusal to homeschool due to the stigmas or the attachments to careers and pride. Like, I didn't spend all this money on my education to sit at home with my kids, which just sounds horrible. I didn't spend all this money on my education to sit with my kids. What? That sounds horrible. I'd rather allow the government indoctrinate my kids than me. Which I don't think the government has no business indoctrinating my kids with anything. And then honestly, if you want to sit there and do the comparison, the school seat hours will win majority of the time. Unless you have a golden, awesome child, which they do exist. You know, the school seat hours will win. With whom you spend the most time usually has the larger impact. Normally. Think about it. How many of you have had like family members as babysitters? Right? So if you drop them off with that family member, let's say you've done this for like 2 or 3 years and all this other stuff, and then like 3 or 4 years later, for some reason there's a close bond with these two. Why? Because they spend a lot of time with them. There's time invested. They spend a lot of time with them. So that has an impact on an individual. Imagine kids spending thousands and thousands of seat hours in a government indoctrinated facility. What kind of impact is it going to have on your kid? Because no matter how much you try to talk them out of it, they're going to roll their eyes at you. You're not them. What do you know? And they got the government and all these fancy placards and pieces of paper that tells them they're qualified. I would say you're not. You can't tell the difference between a male and a female. Ridiculous. It's funny because what does God require? Psalm 51. Let's get into that. It's Psalm 51. The sacrifice the sacrifice I desire, God desires, speaking. Okay, the sacrifice I desire is a broken and contrite heart. God will not despise that. That's the sacrifice that He desires. Hosea 6:6, for I desire mercy, steadfast love, and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. I'd rather you know me than do all the sacrificing stuff. Know who I am. I don't care about these sacrifices because people are doing this stuff. I mean, because like we can get religious with it where it's like, I sacrifice my time with my kids so I could sit down and, do this, what do you call it, this potluck for my church. I'd rather do the potluck for my church rather than go in here and be at my son's soccer game. Your priorities are jacked up. What's the matter with you? I'm servicing God. You're on your head. Your kids need you. Every man's first ministry is his wife and his family. It's actually even a prerequisite to where it's like you're not allowed in a position of leadership if your house is not in order. Which sometimes I battle with myself to where it's like, I think I got to step down. I'm losing my mind. I feel like I'm losing the battle. Anyway, but that's just personal. Hosea 6:6, I desire mercy, steadfast love, not sacrifice. The knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. That's what I desire. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22, Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifices. Obedience is better than sacrifice. And to listen than the fat of rams. You want to know what God desires for you, for me? Our obedience. I forget where, actually I don't have it as a reference, it just came to mind, but it was like when Jesus, I think he made a scenario when he was talking to the Pharisees and Sadducees. He told them, which ones honored their father? The father goes and tells his boys to go out into the field and work. One of them says, okay, Dad, and then never does it. How many of you have had children like that? And the other one says, and sit there and grunts, and just like, I don't want to do it, or whatever. But he goes out and does it anyway. Which one honored his father? The second one. Why? Because it's what he did. I obeyed. That one is the one that honored his father. It's not any different with us. Is our Christianity is nothing but a lip service? Or are you obeying God? Obedience is part of the deal here. I could tell all of you so much that, or I would say, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but the whole idea of a sacrifice is is not burnt offerings and things or whatever it is that you just offer to God. It's none of those things. It's obedience that God requires. And if you want there's a bunch of them. Psalm 40, 6 through 8, Proverbs 21:3, Mark 12:33, Matthew 5:24, Matthew 9:13, chapter 12, verse 7, 23:23, Exodus chapter 19, verse 5, Amos chapter 5, 21 through 24, Micah chapter 6 through 8, Jeremiah 7, 22 through 23, chapter 26, 13, and 11, 4 through 7, Isaiah 1, 11. The list goes on. God says the same thing. I'm sorry, that was probably like a very boring list I just gave you. But it's the same thing. The Lord does the Lord have great delight in offerings and sacrifices as obeying the voice of the Lord? No. To obey is better than sacrifice. It means so much more. Listen, God gives his best to those who leave it up to him. End quote, John Corson. Okay? God gives his best to those who leave it up to him. That's so true. You have to kill yourself to be able to do that. Leah and Rachel constantly tried to outdo one another to achieve their own selfish agendas. You guys realize that? Constantly. And who are they living to honor? Themselves. This is the same question I asked last time. Right? Who are they living to honor? Themselves. If you live to honor God, you will honor all. And I'm going to try and wrap all this up. And I'm tired of, I'm sorry if I keep coming back to this point, and I don't want to tire you out with it. But I actually made this kind of thing, and I hope I honor and love my wife by being patient with her. Right? I am patient with my wife because I desire to honor God. That's why I'm patient with her. Because I choose to honor God, God, by His grace, places me into faith's crucible to produce patience for me to bear. What's a crucible? You might want to, it's a container which metals and other substances are melted or subjected to very high temperatures. Just like how your faith is being tested, like in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, right? Because I choose to honor God, God is actually putting me in situations, and He's constantly trying to make my faith grow so that I may produce by His grace, not by my own merit, but that I may produce patience for others to bear. The fruits of the Spirit, Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 23. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, self-control. Every Christian should be working towards this, or there should be a divine chiseling going on where these things should be abounding. You should be loving. You should be more joyful. You should be more at peace. If you're not, God should be working on that. You understand? That little thing that I just did, you can plug anything in there. I honor my employer by being or by having self-control with him. You can plug anything you want. I have self-control with my employer because I desire to honor God. Plug in whatever kind of scenario you want. And because I choose to honor God, by His grace, He places me in faith's crucible so that I can produce self-control for me to bear. The same thing. You can plug it, you can do whatever you want with it. You can do it with all the fruits. And if you don't have them, pray. Pray that God gives you these: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control. Pray that He gives them to you. God desires obedience. And you're not going to know how to obey Him unless you know Him. Remember, He says, be knowledgeable of Him. The knowledge of God. That's what I want you to have. I want you to know me. Know what pleases your husband. Church, we are the blood-bought bride. Women could even, I was going to go down that road. I'll say, well, you could even minister to other women, but it's just like by knowing what pleases your husband, like your physical, real one. And it's like, well, why are you always like about your husband? And he's like, well, because like we should be about the Lord. I don't know. Maybe that's a bad parallel. No, I tried to get something. I'm sorry. But do you see? Be knowledgeable of Him. He will know what pleases Him. To live in that fashion. That's the Christian-filled life. Being in that crucible, constantly being tested, being torn down, going through fiery trials, so that you're coming out better than you did before. You're working out. Faith, your faith is being worked out. So, I digress. 11 kids born. Benjamin will be the 12th. Okay? And I will close, because I am going way over here. I will close with the gospel given in the first 10 generations of mankind, but also because we went through all the children, pretty much, with the exception of Benjamin. We will also go through in Revelation chapter 7, where the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob, are announced. 12,000 from each tribe at the end, and during Daniel 70th. So I'll say all that. So I'll say this. If I just confused you, this is how beautiful the scriptures are, okay? In which we find in the names. And some of you have already heard this, but hey, I think it's a good reminder, okay? So the first 10 gen treasure, that's what I call it. Genesis chapter 5. You have Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. First 10 people, mankind, through the lineage of Christ. Or this is the lineage. The first 10, they all have meanings. Adam, man. Seth, appointed. Enosh, mortal. Kenan, sorrow. Mahalalel, the blessed God. Jared, shall come down. Enoch, teaching. Methuselah, his death shall bring. And it was on his death that the flood came. When he died, that's when he died that same year. Lamech, the despairing, Noah, rest and comfort. I put all 10 names together. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest and comfort. The gospel message in the first 10 generations of mankind. Wow. Beautiful, right? Now, if you think that was impressive, which I believe it was, also in Revelation chapter 7, God changes the orientation. He actually calls out 12,000 from each tribe to continue his word through the tribulation, or not, I don't want to like using the tribulation. We call it Daniel's 70th week, Jacob's trouble. Okay, God restarts the clock on the end of days. All right, he sends 12,000 from each tribe, 12,000 from Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher. I'm sorry, did you guys want to know where that was? Forgive me. Revelation chapter 7, verses 5 through 8. Okay, Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali. Manasseh is not one of them. That's actually one of Joseph's kids, but that's a story for another lesson. Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. All right? That's 12. Right? 12 tribes, 12,000 from each. But we just read what their names meant. Right? We know what Manasseh is actually when we get later on in Genesis, when the story of Joseph, when he has two children, Manasseh and Ephraim. You guys remember? He has two sons. Story of Joseph. He's the one who was sold into slavery in Egypt. You guys remember that? Okay, whatever. So, Judah means, now I will praise the Lord. Reuben means the Lord has looked upon my affliction. We just read this, right? Gad means how fortunate I am. Asher means happy am I, or what joy is mine. Naphtali means I have struggled. Manasseh means God has made me forget all my troubles. It's a great name. Simeon, Lord heard I was hated and therefore has given me this son. Right? You guys, we just read through all this. Levi, now my husband will be joined unto me or have affection for me. Right? Issachar, God has rewarded me. Zebulun, God has given me a good reward. Joseph, God has removed my disgrace. Benjamin, son of my right hand. Let's do the same thing. Each name has a meaning. Put them all together. What do we have? Now I will praise the Lord. The Lord has looked upon my affliction. How fortunate I am. Happy am I. I have struggled, but God has made me forget all my troubles. The Lord heard that I was hated, and therefore has given me this son. Now will my husband be joined unto me and have affection for me. God has rewarded me. God has given me a good reward. God has removed my disgrace through the Son of his right hand. The gospel message. Again, we have it in the beginning, and we have it right here at the end. Was found by looking for God, wanting to know more about God, right? Having the knowledge, wanting to know more of him. Wanting to know him as I would want to know about my spouse. I want to know more about you. Have any of you ever wanted to know somebody so that you could figure out how you can love them better? I'm not going to buy my wife raisins because she doesn't like them. Right? It's imperative in our Christian walk to be focused on our Savior in all things. Living to honor him, not ourselves. Amen? Let's pray.